Appreciate that. As I hear some of the questions being asked, I hear some of the discussions, I thought probably I'd just put a couple facts in here. I'm the lead Senate sponsor of the VRAA. I'm in talks trying to get broader bipartisan support for it, as there always has been in the past. In fact, restoring the Voting Rights Act has been an overwhelmingly bipartisan effort for virtually the entire history. The landmark law, whether in President Nixon, President Reagan, President Bush, and others. One of the concerns I hear from my Republican friends is that certain preclearance enforcement programs unfairly target some states over others. But I understand that practice-based preclearance applies to every state and every jurisdiction equally. I call it an equal opportunity enforcement power. So, Professor Tolson, could you comment on how practice-based preclearance treats all states and jurisdictions as equals? And shouldn't that help to allay concerns about certain states being treated differently?
Thank you, Senator. So practice-based preclearance is a direct response to the concerns raised by the court in Shelby County versus Holder about having coverage based on outdated practices like the poll tax or literacy tests, and also using those practices to target specific jurisdictions. Practice-based preclearance doesn't target any geographic areas. Instead, it focuses on practices that courts have consistently found to be used against minorities at a point where they are starting to influence the outcome of elections. And so in that way, practice-based preclearance is directly responsive to Shelby County and applies to all jurisdictions equally.
Well, one of the reasons I asked that, some try to say that preclearance is tended to protect just Democratic voters, not other voters. I look at preclearance powers that could stop sudden changes to, absentee voting. And rural and elderly voters who consistently tend to vote Republican rely heavily on absentee voting. So, Mr. Yang, doesn't preclearance powers have to protect the voting rights of all Americans and not just one group or another?
Thank you for that question, Senator Leahy. Absolutely. The program should protect all Americans and not specific categories. And that's, again, the benefit of practice-based preclearance, because we're focusing on specific practices, number one, and number two, using demographics as a trigger. We are not using necessarily a long history with respect to the recognition that demographics are changing. They oftentimes change rapidly, and the needs could change rapidly. As I testified earlier, with respect to the Asian American community, our community is emerging in many places where people would not think of, whether it is in Arkansas with respect to the Pacific Islander community, whether it is in Nevada with respect to the Filipino and Chinese American community. And so having a practice-based preclearance that is triggered by a practice that is historically known to discriminate, and with respect to demographics where an emerging minority community exists, that really ensures that we have equal protection of all different categories.
Well, I like dealing in facts. I know the former President, Mr. Trump, spoke heavily about voter fraud, and saying that's why he lost by several million votes. There was a significant example of voter fraud in Pennsylvania. They investigated that and found that there was a man who voted on behalf of his dead mother for Donald Trump. But it didn't affect the outcome. Now, Professor Tolson, what do we remember about the VRA's history? You studied that as much as anybody I know, and I think about the fact that it brought Republicans and Democrats together across the political spectrum to support it in the past.
Me is that The Voting Rights Act is not designed to protect voters of one party or another, right? It's something that has been consistently, at least prior to 2013, been in place through Republican and Democratic administrations. But in recent years, particularly post-Shelby County, we've seen efforts to try to diminish the political power of minorities in a post-Shelby world. So it's not partisan legislation. And believe it or not, I'm a voting rights expert, and I don't care who people vote for. I just want people to vote. And so the modernizing the Voting Rights Act really is important. And can I make one other point, Senator? 30 seconds left. This notion of widespread voter fraud is not something that is really a thing. And I think it's important to emphasize that, because what we're seeing is states start to legislate to try to stop something that doesn't exist, and sort of to match the rhetoric. So as you pointed out, there are instances of fraud, but we cannot build a regulatory regime in order to stop a problem that is not extensive. We really do have to step in to protect minority voting rights. That has to be our focus. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks very much, Senator Leahy. I'm going to forego my questions and turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr.